Hello,
Hoş geldiniz.
I'm Dr. Işılay Gürsu,
I'm Dr. Peter Cherry.
and welcome to the Heritage Türkiye podcast by the British Institute at Ankara, BIAA. Today, we are very honored to be joined by Bettany Hughes, award-winning historian, author, broadcaster, and the patron of the BIAA. Bettany has spent over 2 decades exploring the histories of ideas, people, and places, from the Bronze Age to the Byzantine Empire to the Ottomans. Her work has taken her across the globe, and her passion for Turkey's layered heritage shines through in her books and documentaries.
To name a few of her books, 2005's book on Helen of Troy, 2010's The Hemlock Cup, Socrates, Athens and the Search for the Good Life, 2017's Istanbul, A Tale of Three Cities, which we'll be talking a bit about today, 2019's Venus and Aphrodite, and most recently, The Seven Wonders of the Ancient World, which is also a TV show on Channel 5 in the UK right now. So Bettany, welcome to Heritage Türkiye.
Oh, thank you. So lovely to be here. Lovely to be talking to you. I'm very jealous. Where are you sitting now? Are you in Ankara or Istanbul? Where exactly are you?
We're in Ankara at the moment.
Oh, so lovely. Well, I'm heading over to Turkey in about 24 hours. So I'll be in the same country very soon.
Fantastic. Well, that leads us to our first question then. So what first sparked your interest in Türkiye?
I think, well, I was obsessed with the country, and I grew up in England. My parents were actually actors and the most delightful people, but constantly out of work. So we didn't really travel when I was a kid. It was a very lovely upbringing, you know, lots of cups of tea around the table talking, but I used to read about other places, and I really evolved this passion in me for wanting to travel. And one of the very first places I went when I was 19, when I was at university, was I came with my tutorial partner on a 2-month backpacking archaeological tour in our university summer vacations around the whole of the country. And I genuinely remember 2 moments of real epiphany. One, when I woke up on my first morning in Istanbul, first time I'd ever been to the city, and just feeling infused with the energy and excitement and, you know, historical possibilities of the country. And I still really, really remember that feeling of waking up and thinking, okay, the journey starts here. And then one of the cities that we went to, obviously, was Ephesus, ancient Ephesus. And I remember walking through, this is in, must have been 85 or 86, walking through a peach grove on our way to the site. And again, suddenly having this realization, really, that this was a place that explained to me the stories of so many cultures, so many civilizations, so much of the history and archaeology that I was studying. But I thought, this is, you know, I have to make this a country that I never stop returning to.
Wonderful. Well, you studied history, and then now you bring it to life on screen. Was this always your plan? How did you first begin working on TV?
Well, I was exactly as you said. So I studied history, specialising in ancient history. And I was just very aware that there were no women on screen talking about history at that point. And I thought, this is so strange because, you know, in my academic life, I'm surrounded by female colleagues in, you know, archaeological circles and historical circles. You know, there's a lot of women writing about literature, but how come I'm not seeing them on television? It just seemed to me odd. So I thought, well, maybe that's something I can try to change. And actually, the very first time, not many people know this, the very first time I ever appeared on television, I was being interviewed about the use of fireworks in Ottoman culture, in Ottoman, you know, this kind of theatre of battle. And I remember the producer saying, oh, have you ever thought about, you know, doing something a bit more in front of camera? I went, well, actually, now you mention it, I have. And this is something I'd love to do. But it was a real struggle. So this was by this point in the 1990s, the early 1990s. And I remember, for instance, going to have an interview with the BBC producer and saying, talking about this extraordinary wealth of understanding and experience from history and how this needs to be shared with the world and it would promote common understanding. And this producer, I remember this so clearly, said, "Can I just tell you 3 things? One, nobody's interested in history anymore," which is shocking to us. But he sort of had a point, because this was the 1990s. The year 2000 was ahead. There was almost this notion there was going to be this massive reset button pushed and all the answers would be in the future and the past was irrelevant. And then he said, nobody is watching history programs on television, which for me is not a reason not to do something. The reason is to make programs that people want to watch. And then he said, and nobody wants to be lectured at by a woman. And this was the 1990s, not the 1890s. And as you can imagine, that put a certain degree of fire in my belly. And I thought, I have to prove you wrong. So it was one of those very, a chance thing in a way, but very fortunate that I had a sort of passion to do something. But actually it was a negative that gave me the energy and adrenaline to think, I have to change this.
Well, thank God for that. Fire in your belly. Anyway. So your shows are very well researched. Can you give us a bit of an insight into how you make them, how they're researched, some insight into the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And people do ask that because I think, we have a company called Sandstone Global that specialises in making culture, civilization, archaeology, travel science films. And we're all incredibly nerdy. We all of us who run the company are absolutely determined to, with all our wit and will and energy and hopefully some wisdom, to try to get authenticity and truth out onto the screen. Because I think, as we all know, that this rectangle that we're staying into now is a very dangerous thing, that you get material out there that isn't true, that isn't well researched, that's put across very persuasively so people believe it. And so what we do is we spend months, probably 3 months, preparing each film with a dedicated researcher, producer. I'll be working on the ideas as well. And it's usually sparked by some kind of new archaeological discovery. So, we think our job as filmmakers is not just to recycle old material, but to share new research, new academic ideas, new discoveries with a wider public. So often that's the core. So we always ask ourselves, so what is it that is going to make this different, that's going to make it worthwhile? People giving up an hour of their time, or 6 hours if it's a series to watch. So it's kind of founded around those conversations with people like yourselves, with archaeologists, with historians, to work out what the kind of fundamental basis of the film should be. And then we spend this very, very consolidated 3 months working together, researching, discussing ideas. We always work with independent historical consultants as well, so that we're making sure there are checks and balances, on what we're getting excited about. And then for each film, we probably spend about 2 weeks on the ground filming each film, and then another sort of 6 to 8 weeks editing and creating it. So it's interesting, actually, because somebody was talking about this the other day, because our job is to make it look incredibly easy. Like I've just sort of woken up in the morning and decided to wander out into a field, meet people I know. But that's the absolute tip of the pyramid. So there's this massive foundation of research and logistical production underneath.
You also write books and then produce documentaries. What comes first?
The books always come first. So they're not TV tie-in books. So and I'm notorious. My publishers, I can't believe that they sort of survive working with me, because I'm notoriously late in delivering my books, because again, I really spend my time. I think you only get one chance to make it good, to kind of make it right again, to hopefully to make it fresh. So the books always come first. So the Istanbul book actually took 10 years to write, gathering the research, again, talking to colleagues, writing it. The Seven Wonders book, which you mentioned, this one, I'd hold up Istanbul, but I don't have an Istanbul copy with me. So the Seven Wonders book, which is the latest one, was appropriately 7 years of research and writing. So that's a very, very long process. And again, what's helpful for us is that then gives us a sort of framework from which to make the film, the documentary films.
Well, you mentioned Istanbul. We are the British Institute at Ankara, but we do also cover Istanbul, and we certainly have in our ranks big Istanbul fans. Işılay was born in Istanbul. I used to live in Istanbul as well. It's my favourite city. And you clearly have a big passion for it as well. So where did this passion come from?
Well, I think it was that first trip when, it was such an important time. As I said, it felt such a positive experience that I was this young woman out there to sort of discover, try to understand the world better, discover the truth of the world. I was met with that very famous Turkish hospitality, so I was made to feel incredibly safe and welcome, as was the young woman that I was traveling with. I mean, it's one of those things you then look back on it and think, my gosh, we were 18-year-old women just traveling in tiny shorts, sort of backpacking. But it was, we had the most amazing time. It was so, as I said, so looked after by everybody. But I think it's for me, I mean, there's so much to say about Istanbul. Obviously, I think it's such an important city in the world consciousness because it tells us not just about what it takes to make a city, which is an incredibly important thing. Because if you think about it, it's hard to live together. It's hard to live together in a household, in a village, in a town, in a city, when you have all these different influences and characters. How do you make that work? And Istanbul really, for me, is a sort of incarnation through time of what it takes both to make a great city, but more importantly, what it takes to live together successfully. And a lot of that is about actually communicating across borders and boundaries of, as you know, Istanbul is such a dynamic city framed by these waters, which have been written about so beautifully through time by different historians. It's been described, I think was it Procopio? Somebody described it as garlanded by waters, as a diamond between two sapphires and emeralds, all of these things. But it's very true, that water, I don't know if you agree, just gives it this kind of
Absolutely.
brio and energy and sense of the possibility of evolution and change and development and movement. So it's the opposite of a static city. It has such extraordinary inherent life in what it is, both historically and in terms of contemporary living.
What a wonderful way of describing Istanbul, I would say. It has a great place in world's consciousness. I mean, that was really very, very well said. A practical question, though. Are there any favorite places of yours in Istanbul?
So many. I mean, I've got a lovely family whom I love very, very much in England, and if that wasn't the case, I would move to Istanbul. There's no question about it. I would say, something people ask often if they're travelling to the city is exactly that, recommendations. I would say, again, the one way to understand the city is to get on a boat, to travel on one of those ferries either across the Bosphorus or up it, to understand that it's a city. This sort of, slightly hackneyed phrase about a bridge between East and West, it's far more than that. It's far more dynamic. It relates to all points of the compass, East and West, and also North and South. So I actually think the being on the Golden Horn or being on the Bosphorus or being on the Sea of Marmara just allows you to be in two times at once, because you're there physically in the 21st century, but actually the ideas and the history and the accounts that you can access on those boat journeys, for me, is absolutely irreplaceable and completely unique. So I'd say to be on the water, and I can't, there are so many monuments. It's like choosing between your children. I can't actually say which is my favourite, but I suppose the very fact that I would consider moving there, because I know that I would be able to visit a favourite place every day of the year, tells you how special it is.
Yeah, I never fail to be inspired when I'm in Istanbul. I was there last weekend, and it's just fantastic when you're on the, crossing from Kadıköy over to the European side, and you just see all that layers of history. It's a really fantastic place.
Incredible. I mean, I think it's something like 42 habitation layers that you can trace archaeologically. The fact that there's a history that goes, I don't know, obviously, as we know, right the way back, sort of with these incredible excavations with of the remains, under the Bosphorus, and with all the new works that have been done. I think it's something like 90,000 crates of archaeological material was discovered, to a story that goes back at least 8,000 years. Beyond that as well, but with incredible evidence of those early plucky inhabitants of what is now Istanbul 8,000 years ago, women and men, in this very, very beautiful landscape. I think there's something like 9,000 species of flora have been discovered from those digs, and making lives for themselves with these, if it's wooden canoe paddles, if that's what it is, and eating figs and pistachios, and it's a very vivid world. Little spoons made out of wild cow bones. That there's been a lot happening there across so many millennia.
Well, I want to steer us slightly to the Ottomans, actually, because the BIA, alongside our partner institutions at the British International Research Institutes, have just won a big grant for a project called Ottoman Mobilities and Interactions. And this project is all about exploring the ways that the Ottoman Empire was not a static empire, that we had lots of flows of movement, people, ideas that shaped the empire. And it struck me that in your filming, you visit a lot of places that were part of the Ottoman Empire. Would you like to talk a little bit about what you observed from the Ottoman past in these places?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's absolutely true. I drive my crew mad because wherever we are, and there's an Ottoman heritage, I'm really sorry, I've just got to go and see this, remaining bit of Ottoman road, or that's definitely a kind of wall of an Ottoman fort there. So you're absolutely right. And it's exactly as you say, you obviously know this far better than I, but, the Ottoman culture and civilization is very much a road-based culture. Didn't somebody call it a dromocracy? It's all about the kind of power of the road and connections, and therefore having to understand people along those routes. So when I've been filming in Albania, for instance, extraordinary Ottoman heritage there, in Bulgaria too, so each place I go to, there'll be something both very physical and visible, but also, as you know, quite a lot of Ottoman documents that have been held by sort of public town halls and cities, still sitting waiting to be properly explored. So I think that is one of my attractions to the Ottomans and to their story, is that sense of kind of movement. I've just been in Uzbekistan filming, and I'll come back and talk about it when I'm allowed to talk about it properly, but incredible lost city there, early Turkic city, which is the moment where, these are still people who, in theory, classified as nomads, and yet they're building enormous cities. So it's that. What I love about the Ottomans is that they're not mutually exclusive. You can have beautiful, monument-rich urban centres, but also this sense of movement and the kind of, the sort of joy, really, of travelling and being on the road. So a lot of the places, even if I'm not making films about Turkey or about Istanbul, I always manage to crowbar in the Ottoman story wherever I am. And we actually hope that we'll be making a new series about the Ottomans next year.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's something we're trying to.
Please, let us know. We're developing a sort of Ottoman centre at the BIA. So please do let us know.
Oh, that would be amazing. Definitely.
But just a final question on Istanbul, because it is such an alluring topic. So one thing I really like in your book is that you call it a city of three cities, three names. So the idea of Byzantium, Constantinople, Istanbul. And I often find, speaking to people in the UK, that song, basically, Istanbul, not Constantinople, has got a lot to answer for. because people say, oh, should I call it Constantinople? Should I call it Istanbul? When did the name change? And the answer is a lot more complex than people are used to. You know, there were lots of different names used at different times for that city. But do you find in your research and your TV shows that you do a lot of stereotype busting or myth busting like that as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely, we try to aim to do that. I mean, I think, you know, historians' job is to fill in the gaps, both in history and in the understanding of history. So we try to be very kind of explicit and transparent. And you know, in some of the programs you've seen, I'll talk about those three names and what they mean, and the fact, as you say, that quite often they were used contemporaneously. It's not like there's a sort of linear development. Yeah, I think it's, I mean, my role as a filmmaker is absolutely to be apolitical. We're incredibly, you know, this is something that we talk about the whole time, that it's like, you know, top of all of our contracts, because, you know, my job is to look at the past. It's not to talk about the present. There are plenty of people who do that, so I can't leave that to them. But yeah, no, you are right, because there are still people, by no fault of their own, just by chance of education, who don't know that Byzantium, Constantinople, Istanbul are the same cities. They think they're different places, you know. So you have to. I always think that with the films, the point of these films is never to prove that you're clever or how clever our team are. It's to make other people feel clever, realise how clever they are by, you know, giving them facts and understanding. But yeah, I mean, it is, as you say, it's evolved. I mean, also, as you said, it's had so many other names, you know, the Second Rome, obviously the threshold, it's been called Allah's city, you know, all Augusta Antonina in the Roman period. It's been given lots of different names, the world's desire, the queen of cities, all of these. So it's it's a city that's so important in people's imaginations. It's kind of lived with all these different nominations that people have given it.
At the beginning of the episode, you mentioned your experience as a woman in front of TV, and we know that in your work you mention a lot of historical characters, women characters. So, are there any women who inspire you, who admire, that come from your work?
Yeah, I mean, so many, and again, the kind of purpose of that really is to write people back into the gaps of history. You know, like it or not, women have always been 50%, slightly more than 50% of the human population, but we occupy a tiny percentage of the official records and very definitely of kind of historical delivery of the past. So the kind of formal writing of records of history. So I sort of feel like I'm, you know, putting them back on the screen or onto the page for their sakes. So many women from Istanbul itself. Theodora, I'm a huge fan of Empress Theodora. Safiye, of course, these sort of inhabitants of those Istanbul palaces who have an incredible sense of themselves. You know, something I write about in the book is this amazing letter that comes from, as you know, from the harem in Topkapi, in the royal harem, to Elizabeth I of England, with this, you know, letter with this basically sorting out a bit of politics, you know, and then this exchange of gifts, and then sharing makeup tips and talking about, you know, odoriferous oils for the hands, you know, that can come from England. And I just love that kind of sense of themselves that these women had. So I find them, and sometimes they're people who've just been neglected, who are nameless within the record. But yeah, it's not I remember somebody saying to me, when you do that thing of writing women back into the story of the world, it's not that you're excluding anybody, you're just making sure that you have a bigger table with more chairs. And I think that's a really, you know, really helpful, positive way to look at it. You're not taking anybody's chair away, you're just adding some.
Yes, that's also a very wonderful way of describing it. The BIA also had some projects on cultural heritage management, like safeguarding archaeological assets of Turkey, Sarat we call it, or our PCD Heritage Trail project. And in these projects, we always looked at the local communities and how people assign values to heritage in contemporary times. And your work also involves local communities in different ways. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about this aspect?
Yeah, definitely. And it's so interesting that that's one of your key projects as well, because again, I think when you talk about history and memory, it's so important to remember that physically, physiologically, we are creatures of memory. You know, we don't carry memory in a sort of chest of drawers in our brain that we can pull out and put back in. We carry memory as synaptic connections right across our brain, and we cannot have a future thought unless we access a memory of some kind. It's called the default mode network, is where both memory and imagination sit. So they're completely umbilically linked. And I think that's one of the reasons that people instinctively understand that heritage and culture and cultural heritage and history matters. Why people, in the most extreme times, at times of natural disasters or war, will still rush to save people, but also to save artifacts, monuments, And if you think about it, in some ways, that's illogical, but it matters so much because these are repositories of shared memory, of understanding, of identity. And increasingly, I think, everybody is realizing that history can be protected and preserved and promoted via local guardians, local curators, people within their community. It's an amazingly positive way of saving and empowering cultural heritage, and actually it can be an economic way that people survive. If because I know, as a traveller and someone who makes these programs, that a lot of people watch and then will come to visit the place as a result, that actually that sense of getting out of the obvious places, sort of getting on the road, discovering more local histories, is something that tourists and travellers really want to do. So there's a real economic possibility too of people involved in sharing their culture, reclaiming traditional crafts that they can then use to kind of create things for people to buy. So it's an incredibly, I love the idea that this is a priority for you, because it's nothing other than positive. And we also, just to answer your question, I was just thinking about your question properly, one of the things, our sort of real mantra that we can repeat to ourselves the whole time, to constantly remind ourselves, is that we're only ever a guest in someone else's country, and it's our hosts, it's their history. I just sort of think of myself as a kind of enthusiastic boat that can help carry people's stories to other places, but it belongs to those communities. So you're right, in the film, the way that we do the films and research, both in front of camera and behind, is very much to involve and put front and centre as a priority the people whose history and culture it is.
I think that's a really beautiful, eloquent way of putting also the BIA's mission, actually, that kind of idea that we are a guest in Türkiye, and sort of trying to respect and promote the rich heritage and culture of this fantastic region. Yeah. So I think it's a really beautiful way of putting it.
That's right.
But let's go briefly to the present then, because you've already shown us your book. So you have a new TV show out right now, 7 Wonders of the Ancient World. My mum's been watching it.
That's great. Does she like it?
So she loves it. She loves it. Congratulations, basically. And would you like to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so these are the real 7 ancient wonders. So on the original list, people sometimes forget there really was a 7 wonders list that was written down on papyrus, and we've got fragments of the oldest copy that was used to wrap a mummy in Egypt on the banks of the Nile. So it's a real list of real places that real people through history really went to. It was a bucket list, an ancient bucket list. So we thought it was kind of important to make a series that made that point to people, that actually it was places that these were places that people travelled to, and they're all places that people can travel to today. So obviously the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus in Bodrum is beautiful, beautiful site. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, again, extraordinary. Ephesus town is great. Go and see the temple site too. So yeah, so we made the series very much as a travelogue. There's a whole program that's just dedicated to Türkiye, and we also did this experiment, which is, I think, has worked, of for the first time putting QR codes onto the screen where people can scan. If you've got a smartphone, so you don't need special spectacles or goggles or anything. If you scan it, you can also get an augmented reality exploration of each monument on your phone, so you can understand more about the mausoleum and how it was painted, or more about the actual scale of the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. So yeah, so it's been a real adventure. The last episode went out this weekend, but it's going to now will be available internationally, so it's now going to travel all around the world, we hope. So I hope it comes to you guys. I'm sure it will. Somebody will show it. But yeah, now it's on it's now on its own global journey.
We are looking forward to see.
So I hope you like.
Yeah, very much. Well, I'm coming to the UK later this week, actually.
Please.
So I'm
Great.
planning
So
to watch it all.
Watch
So,
it on
yeah.
catch up. Tell all your friends. You know,
I will do.
the more people who watch, I always say this, and it really is as simple as that. The more people who watch these documentaries, the more we can make. If people don't watch them, we can't make them. So it's fantastic to spread the word about them.
Definitely.
This brings us to our last question.
Yeah.
We know that you have many awards, but we tend to think that one of the most important things is that the jewel in your crown is being the patron of the BIAA. So our last question is usually, how do you see the BIAA's role in UK and Turkey relationships, and what are your hopes for its future?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, I think as you were both saying, it's an honour to do this, because archaeology is so important. So it's so important in reminding people about the value of the past, of understanding it in a really subtle, nuanced and fresh way, rather than, you're saying, having stereotypes or even, falsehoods that then just get promoted, that you kind of keep history really honest and positive. And I think, isn't it true that Turkey has more archaeological sites than any other nation on earth? I seem to remember being told that once, and I'm absolutely certain it's true. So as you said, it's so rich, and the fact that one of the things that you work to do is to help people to understand that story and to kind of devote your time to promoting that just seems to me a completely wonderful thing. And we have to understand each other across nations, across borders, across boundaries. And actually the past can be a way that we find a kind of common ground that we can do that on, that we can reach out and hold hands and just be fascinated by other people, because we're a hyper-social species, It's something I really felt when I was writing the Wonders book and doing that we're hardwired to want to wonder at the world, to want to create wonders, to talk about them, to travel to them, to share them, because if we wonder, we engage, and if we engage, we understand, and if we understand, we care, and if we care, we love. So, promoting cultural heritage and the wonder of it is something that I really genuinely think can help to bind us together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bettany. This was a wonderful episode.
Thank you so much, Bettany. Thank you so much for your time.
Such a pleasure. Lovely to chat, and I can't wait to be back in the country soon.
Well, we look forward to, I'm sure Türkiye looks forward to offering a very warm hoş geldin to you. So thank you very much. But just one thing for us then. So stay tuned. This is the first episode in our second series, actually. So we've started it in, I think, great style.
Great.
So stay tuned, and görüşürüz.
Goodbye. Lots of love. See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.